Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our last whisky tasting prior to our whisky festival. And what a way to finish this year with Angus Dundee with Glencadam and Tomintoul whiskies. You're in for a treat tonight. We'll be doing 8 drams, no break for cheese and biscuits, just going straight through. Before we do the tasting, just a roundup of what's happening. With regards to the Whisky Festival, we're pleased to say that this year, not only are we bringing back the masterclass, we are actually bringing back 2 masterclasses. The first one will be with Ian MacLeod with a range of their whiskies, telling you the history of Ian MacLeod. But one of the whiskies, very privileged to have people try it, is the 32-year-old Rosebank at £1,500 a bottle. That's one of 8 whiskies that you'll be trying for that masterclass. So watch this space. Tickets will be coming out soon. Information will be coming out soon. And following that masterclass, there will be another one, Glen Scotia, doing basically a breakdown, a DNA, a reconstruction of the Victorianus. So the 5 different whiskies to try to show the end product. So that will be the second masterclass. First one will last about 1 hour 15 minutes. Second one about 45. But you have to obviously buy a festival ticket or purchase a festival ticket to get yourself into the masterclasses. So watch this space. We will give you as much notice as we can because spaces are limited. 35 for the Ian MacLeod one, 20 only for the Glen Scotia one. The special prices are on at the moment for the website. They're only available for 1 week. If you can, please place your orders as soon as you can, because if we do run out of stock, then we obviously have to place an order in as soon as we can. Our plan also next year, if we can, as part of a whisky group, is to go to Campbelltown and visit Glen Scotia on the Friday afternoon, stay overnight, visit Springbank on the Saturday morning, and Cairn Saturday afternoon, or vice versa. It's not actually been decided yet. Stay overnight, obviously, on the Saturday, then head home on the Sunday. So 2-night stay, 3 distilleries, probably April time, but we're not too sure. Places are obviously going to be limited, but again, we'll give you as much information as you can, and you have to be a Whisky Club member to come and visit Campbelltown. So have to rejoin. So with no further ado, we had a great evening last Friday, absolutely fantastic. Went down a storm. Cameron's a great speaker. We had a great result. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Cameron McPherson from Angus Dundee. Good evening.
Hello. Thanks, Brian.
Hello again. Hello again.
Yeah, hello again for the third time.
Aye. As I said, it was a great night last Friday. Everybody had a great time, and it was good that you could pop into the shop and see the shop, even though it's under construction at the minute. Get a bit of TLC. It was good for you to come in and see what we are. So yes, it was a grand evening. It was good fun.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll just crack on, and you can tell your story and the 8 drams, and I'll pop back on after each one, and we'll see what the reaction is. So please do, if you have any comments, it does help both Cameron and ourselves if there's comments coming up, so we can interact with each other and get some answers and get some questions and get the history of 2 great distilleries in Scotland. So over to you, Carl.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brian. And yeah, I guess thank you everyone else for choosing to spend your Friday night with me drinking a good selection of drams. But like Brian said, if anybody does have any questions at all tonight, feel free to pop them in for them to pop up on my screen. you'll probably figure out quite quick I am not following a script or anything. This is just going to be a good couple hours of me winging it with a few drams. But first of all, in terms of the order of the drams that we're going through tonight, you've all had your kits sent out from Brian. Quick question, Brian. I know you showed me the miniatures with the numbers all on them. Does it tell people which each of the miniatures are? Or are we going... Okay, cool.
They have a tasting sheet exactly as we did at the Railway Club. So they've all got the special prices, and then all they have to do is order it on the internet, on the website afterwards. So yeah, they know exactly what the prices are.
Brilliant. Sounds good. I was just going to quickly run through the order, but you've already got the order in front of you on the sheets of paper anyway, so we're all good. So first of all, we are obviously going through Glencadam Distillery, and this is the same order that I did last Friday. And normally, when I'm doing a lot of tastings, I would normally actually start off with Tomintoul Distillery, because generally, Tomintoul is a much more gentle style of whiskey. But the expressions that we're going through for Tomintoul tonight are a bit of a heavier and punchier style of Tomintoul than you might be used to. So that's why we're finishing off with Tomintoul at the end this time. Now, the first drama tonight, which is kind of been popped up on the screen, is the Glencadam Madeira. Now, this is part of our non-age statement, small batch cask finishing range. So although it is a non-age statement, everything in the range is around 8 years old. So they have all spent 6 years in bourbon casks, and then roughly 18 to 24 months as a finish in their respective cask types. So it is quite a big range. We've got Madeira, Amarone, which is next, and then we've got Oloroso, PX, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Tawny Port, White Port, and there's probably a good 2 or 3 others that I've completely forgotten about as well. So it is quite a big range. But I'll tell you a little bit more about the range, but first I'll tell you about the dram. So, like I said, this has spent 6 years in bourbon casks and then 2 years in Madeira casks. Now, what's quite interesting about this one is we've also got a 15-year-old Madeira cask, but they're using 2 different styles of Madeira. So it's quite cool to compare the 2 different styles of Madeira to each other if you have 2 of the bottles, or if you find 2 of them at a bar anywhere. So the one that we're trying tonight is using a white grape style of Madeira. So the grape that they've used is Boal. So it's a white grape. So it's came across as well. First of all, Glencadam, for those of you who are not familiar, Glencadam is quite a bright and tropical and fruity style of spirit. So this white grape style of Madeira really does just help enhance a lot of these tropical fruity notes. But to be honest, I think it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a trick, this one. Well, not a trick, but it's a little bit deceptive, because when you look at it in the bottle and in the glass, it looks like quite a light colour of whiskey. But on the nose, it's still really quite light and bright and fresh, I find. But then when you get into the palate, it really does become quite syrupy. And I do still manage to get a lot of your more dried fruits coming through with it as well. So it's not as bright as your typical Glencadam. So a typical Glencadam would be the 10-year-old. I hope a good few of us have tried the 10-year-old, because it's an absolutely beautiful whiskey. And it's really just the perfect example of a Glencadam. It's Glencadam's distillery DNA in a bottle. Someone said, I guess that's Brian, that it's got a lovely mouthfeel to it. So Glencadam really generally does have a great mouthfeel to it because of the size and shape of the stills that we've got at Glencadam. So we've got quite short, fat and stumpy stills, which on paper tells you that you're going to get a bit of a heavier and potentially harsher style of spirit. But because these stills are quite short, it means we capture loads of oils in our spirit. And the line arm on the still actually goes up the way by roughly 15 degrees. So what that does is it increases reflux in the still at the distillery. So with the increased reflux in the still, we get a very kind of clean style of spirit. But with the stills being still quite short, we still manage to capture loads of these oils. So Glencadam, in terms of creating a spirit, creates quite a fun, like, hybrid style of spirit where it's quite dense and heavy, but the flavour is really quite bright and tropical and fruity. So yeah, it does. It's got a lovely mouthfeel to it, and that generally is quite consistent across the board with Glencadam. It's generally got a beautiful mouthfeel, and because of these oils that we manage to capture in our spirit, it means that you generally get a really fantastic, longer-lasting finish with Glencadam. Because these oils that we're capturing in the spirit, when you're drinking the whiskey, these oils, once you've swallowed it, that's what's clinging to your tongue, your teeth, your cheeks. So that flavour that's left in your mouth is literally just the oils left over from your whiskey that are kind of hanging around. And that's also another reason why Glencadam generally responds very well to a wee touch of water. So whenever people ask me like what the correct way to drink their whiskey is, I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times before, but there is no correct way to drink your whiskey. You can drink it however you want. If you're enjoying it, then it doesn't matter what you're doing to your whiskey. But if you're wanting to kind of enhance a lot of the aromas and the flavour of your whiskey, then a little splash of water really will go a long way. And that's because when your whiskey is sat in your glass, there is like a thin layer of oil that's going to sit on top of your whiskey. And although it's a thin layer of oil, it's quite kind of thick and heavy. So it acts as a bit of a seal on the top of the glass. So if you add like a teardrop of water to your whiskey, it's going to break up that surface layer of oil on your dram and release a lot of these aromas. So generally, because of the kind of the oil content that we've got at Glencadam's with Glencadam's spirit, it usually responds very well to water because I always find the oilier the whiskey, the more water will really help open the whiskey up and really just release a lot of any of those kind of trapped aromas. Now, in terms of the flavour profile for the one that we're on, just to try and loop back to the dram that we're on, like I said, this white grape style of Madeira really does just help enhance that fruitier side of Glencadam, and it is really quite syrupy, and it's kind of like yellow raisins, and it's a little bit kind of like spongy as well, but it's a really, overall, just a really sweet and easy drinking whiskey. Now, this is bottled at 46% ABV, and it's natural colour, and it's not chill filtered. So everything from Glencadam's range is 46% natural colour and non-chill filtered. There are a couple exceptions which will fall outside of that. So our single casks, all of our single cask bottlings are bottled at cask strength and then natural colour and non-chill filtered. So they're going to be a lot higher in ABV. But then we do have one bottling which is bottled down at 40%, which has been chill filtered, and that's the American Oak, which you can actually get out of most Tesco's in Scotland at the moment. But that's a bit more of a kind of like brand building dram for us, the American Oak, because like I said, you can find it in Tesco, so it's really good to kind of get Glencadam's name out there, because so most of my tastings, I start off most of my tastings asking people who's heard of Glencadam. The majority of these tastings, I only get a few hands popping up here or there. Last weekend at Dram Busters, almost the entire room, all 50 or 60 people that were in the room, their hands shot up. So I didn't start off this tasting because I'm kind of just assuming that a good portion of you are already quite familiar with Glencadam, which is nice to see. But for the most part, Glencadam really is quite a small brand which flies under the radar quite a lot. So it's really good for the American Oak being in Tesco's because that's only just gone in a couple months ago. And it's really just to get the brand's name out there and help us do a bit of brand building, if anything, and help anybody who hasn't heard of Glencadam maybe discover it. And then if they like the one that they've tried out at Tesco, they'll maybe start going to a specialist store like TB Watson's and pick up another bottle while they've had it. But like I said, for the most part, Glencadam is a really small brand and not many people are familiar with it at all. So Glencadam is in a town called Brechin, which is just in between Aberdeen and Dundee, if anybody's not familiar with Brechin, on the east coast, just by Montrose. And I did a tasting up in Stonehaven, maybe about 6 months ago now, and that was about 50 or 60 people in the room, all of them locals. So I thought Stonehaven, 20-minute drive away from Brechin. So I assumed that the majority of the room would have been familiar with Glencadam as well. But again, I started off my tasting asking everyone who had heard of Glencadam, and out of everybody in the room, out of all the locals who were there, only one person had put their hand up. And he had never even tried Glencadam. He had just heard of it. And the reason he had heard of it is because he had went and done a tour at the Scotch Whisky Experience in Edinburgh. If anybody's been there, it's pretty cool. They do a lot of tours, and that basically just gives you the foundations of whisky. Because that place, 99% of their customers are tourists. Most of them have never even tried whiskey before in their life, so it's really good to give people that kind of base knowledge on whiskey. So this guy had gone and done a tour with the Scotch Whisky Experience, and Glencadam happened to be on tour that week, but they put 6 drams on tour. You'll get a selection between all the regions or a blend, and Glencadam was the whiskey that was on for the Highland region, but he didn't choose it. So he had never even tried Glencadam. He had only heard of it. He had never tried it. So, and so, like I said, it is just a very small brand where we really don't get out there as much as we should. And it does fly under the radar quite a lot.
That was a great start to the evening, as it was last week. It was a great start to the evening.
Yeah, it's a beautiful dram. It is really good.
The distillery is right in the dead centre of town, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of people think that with us being not very well known, and even the locals not actually knowing that about the distillery, they think it must just be like on the outskirts of Brecon, but it's literally dead centre, right behind the football grounds. If anyone's been to the Brecon football grounds, for some reason, the football team seems to be the only reason anybody has ever heard of Brecon. But we're right behind the football grounds. But the problem is, because the road that leads up to the distillery it's a very old road. So Glencadam was built in 1825. So the road that you use to get there is very, very narrow. And it just looks like you're going up someone's driveway if you turn up.
It does. Yeah, you think you're heading out the town, actually.
yeah, exactly. So, like, you've really got to mean to go to the distillery to actually get there. But yeah, I mean, my eldest brother lived in Brecon for a short period. So he was studying to be a doctor, and he was doing his placement at Ninewells in Dundee. He got the brains of the family. I got a pretty decent liver though. While he was doing his placement in Dundee, he decided to stay in Brecon because he didn't want to stay in Dundee. And when I told him that I got this job and that one of the distilleries was in Brecon, he thought it was one of these brand new distilleries that's just been chucked up out of nowhere. And when I told him it was 200 years old, he a bit fell off his chair. So, like, a lot of the people who live in Brecon don't even know about the distillery. If they don't physically work there, if they don't have a friend who works there, or if they don't have a family member that works there, then they don't really know about the distillery.
Yeah, Karen was just saying we do Galway Glass Engraving, and Karen does the Brecon City Awards, annual awards.
All right.
For them, so we know about Brecon City. Well, we've been lucky enough. We visited Glencadam. I don't know, 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago, when we did a little trip up north. So we've actually been to the distillery. It was nice. That's where we know. I think graveyard is it not?
Yeah, so that's quite a big reason why we can't expand in terms of production at Glencadam, because all of the land around Glencadam distillery is graveyards. It's not even like we've got one beside us. The 3 other kind of sides of Glencadam is graveyards, and then the other side is the only way to get into the distillery. So we can't expand at all, just because if we go around and start digging up graves, then well, everyone will be very unhappy.
Well, you don't want the 2 spirits colliding, do you?
Yeah.
Your spirits and their spirits.
We could do like a Halloween bottling of Glencadam or something. The graveyard dram.
Remember where you heard this first, ladies and gentlemen. Keep that to yours. Have a word with marketing about that. No, that's a great start.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, while we're at it, I guess we'll head on to the second dram then.
Yeah.
I don't want to move too fast, but
no, that's okay. We're bang on time.
So the next dram that we're doing is it's also part of our non-age statement cask finishing series, and it's the Amarone cask finish that we're going through this time. I hope my camera's actually good enough for people to see. So yeah, like I said, with the first dram, the Madeira that we had, this one has spent 6 years in a bourbon cask, and then it's had 2 years, roughly 2 years, 18 to 24 months as a finish in these Amarone red wine casks. Now, something that I personally find with red wine casks is it really splits a room. There's a lot of people that I speak to when I'm out and about. I do a lot of work with the on-trade, so with pubs, bars, restaurants, and then I do a lot of festivals as well. So I do. I speak to a lot of people when I'm out and about, and we have quite a lot of wine cask finishes with the Amarone, a Merlot, a Pinot Noir. Over at Tomintoul, we've got some Tempranillo as well, which is pretty cool. And I definitely find that wine cask finishes tend to split a room, and I think quite a big reason for that is because a lot of companies who have done wine cask finishes before, not all of them, I'm not out here to brand bash, but a lot of companies who have done wine cask finishes before, I feel just don't really give the casks the time they actually need to positively influence the whiskey. So, like I said, we as a finish, we're going for roughly 2 years as a finish. And 2 years is on the longer side for a cask finish, because there's a lot of bigger distilleries which will maybe only finish for 3 months or 6 months, and some will even go up to a year. Like I said, we're not the only ones that are out here doing longer cask finishes, but 2 years is definitely on the longer side of it. And with a lot of these other cask finishes that go out after spending 3 to 6 months in a cask, you're not, especially with a wine cask finish, you're not really getting that much or that big an influence coming through from the cask. Because what you will get, you'll get a surface level influence coming directly from the wine that was in the cask before. But if you're only finishing for a short period of time, that's where it's kind of going to stop. Whereas Ian Forteeth, our master blender, so he's done one of these online tastings for you guys before. So that's up on YouTube. And I used that when I was applying for this job. I must have watched that about 4 or 5 times as research for the job. So it's quite funny being on the other side of things now. But that was about 2 years ago now. So Ian Forteeth, our master blender, who did the tasting before, the way he's explained it to me is that with wine casks, if you're going for more of a 2-year finish or a longer finish around that kind of 18 to 24 month mark that we're doing, when you're going for a longer finish, you'll get a lot of kind of depth and spice and complexity coming through from the wood, which you wouldn't necessarily get if you're just finishing for 3 months or 6 months. And the reason for that is because, to be perfectly frank, the weather in Scotland's crap. So for the very few weeks or days, if we're lucky, where it's actually a little bit warmer in Scotland, the pores in the wood in the cask, they're going to, when it's warm, they're going to open up a little bit. And what that means is it allows what are my thoughts on double maturation, on finish versus double maturation, and what age does Glencadam draw the line? I'll come back to that. Really good question. I have actually had that question before, and it stumped me. So, because I wasn't too sure how to answer it, but I'll come back to it. So when the weather is a little bit warmer in Scotland, it means the pores in the wood, they're going to open up a little bit, and it allows the whiskey to penetrate a little bit further into the cask, into the wood, and pull out flavours of the actual wood and influence coming from the cask. And then when it's cold again, the cask will kind of squeeze shut, these pores will squeeze shut. So it's like a really kind of slow sponging effect with the whiskey going in and out of the wood. And if you only go for a 3 month finish, then it's not really going to allow much time for these pores to open up and for the whiskey to get inside. Or if so with the 2 year maturation or finish, we're going for 2 full seasonal rotations. Whereas if you're going for 3 months, you're going to get 1 season out of that. And then if you're going for 6 months, you'll get 2 seasons, or a year, you'll get 4 seasons. Whereas with us going for 2 years, that's us going for 2 full seasonal rotations of this whiskey going in, and it's kind of sponging in and out of the cask. So that's how we managed to get a really good amount of influence coming through from the cask and the wood itself. So I have found, especially with the Amarone wine cask finish, that a lot of these people that I speak to before who don't like wine cask finishes generally are actually quite surprised by the Amarone cask finish, because it brings a lot of kind of depth and spice to it that I don't always get with other wine cask finishes. And to be perfectly honest with you guys as well, so like I said, we've got a huge non-age statement cask finishing range where we use quite a lot of different cask types. And quite a big part of that for us, if anything, has been a bit of research for us to see like what people are buying, what people are interested in. So the PX cask is absolutely flowing because PX is quite a big thing right now. Everyone loves PX and it makes really good whiskey, so right enough. However, I would say one of the slower moving SKUs from our non-age statement range is the Pinot Noir cask finish. But to be honest, that's kind of one of my personal favourites because it's just such a beautiful whiskey. It's quite jammy and nutty, but I think it just doesn't really get that much attention because it's a wine cask finish. And like I said, that tends to split a room, and it's not got that kind of allure that putting PX on a label tends to have. Now, my thoughts on a double maturation versus a finish and what age Glencadam draws the line. That's a really good question. So technically, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but technically, I don't think there is the SWA so the Scotch Whisky Association, they don't have strict guidelines on what classifies as a finish and what would then classify as a double maturation. So my personal opinion and my personal thoughts on that is if you are finishing a whiskey for more than 3 years, I would personally class that as a double maturation, because 3 years is the youngest a whiskey can be to be Scotch whisky, right? So that whiskey that you're finishing in that cask has now been in that cask long enough for that individual section of it to classify as Scotch whisky. Even if it's a 50-year-old whiskey that you've chucked in a Madeira or an Amarone cask for 3 years, I would then class that I personally would class it as a double maturation because, well, technically 3 years is the shortest period you're allowed for a full maturation. You wouldn't be able to just take new spirit off the still and, like we do, put it in an Amarone cask for 2 years and bottle it as whiskey. So I personally would view, once your finish goes over 3 years, then it's a double maturation. In terms of where Glencadam draws the line, it's not so much where Glencadam draws the line, and it's more where Ian for Teeth draws the line. So Ian, our master blender, he is he's like one of the busiest people I've ever met in my life, but he's constantly analysing these casks and making sure that they're progressing in a positive way, and that the Amarone cask or the Madeira cask or whatever other casks we're using are progressing in a direction we want them to progress, right? So I wouldn't say he has a textbook that tells him he's not allowed to finish or double mature over a certain period of time. It is literally just however long that cask needs to positively influence the whiskey, that's what it will get. So I think to be honest, our non-age statement range with the Amarone cask finish and the Madeira cask finish, and even our aged cask finishes as well, they are all really the perfect example of that. Because the reason I was saying earlier that we're finishing these for roughly 2 years is because each cask type has a different finishing length. And they're not strict finishing lengths either. We'll just do it until that cask or that bottling line is ready. So some casks are more active than others. So a PX sherry cask, really, really active. So that's not going to need as long to develop properly as perhaps a wine cask, because the wine cask, you need to kind of get that depth and complexity off of the cask, whereas a PX, you're going to get quite a big influence quite quickly just off of the sherry itself. So a PX cask might not need as long as an Amarone cask. So it's all of these whiskies in this range have got varied ages. And quite a big reason why this entire range is non-age statements is effectively for a bit of consistency, because people would start getting confused I listed them all out for you guys earlier, and suddenly if you had them all side by side and 3 of them are a 7, 4 of them are an 8, and 2 of them are a 9-year-old, Not that any of that is accurate, by the way. That's me just spitballing. I have no idea on the exact ages of any of these. But a big reason why we don't have age statements on them is because they are all effectively different ages. It's just when this line was ready to be bottled is when it got is when it was ready, and that's that.
Well, that's why you've got your distillery managers and your master blenders. It's these guys that know the casks and come to do many tastings to ultimately decide, aye, it's ready. I suppose they could say double maturation is, okay, if it's 6 years in a bourbon cask, it must be 6 years in an Amarone cask. We must split it. That's double maturation. It's spent as much time in each cask at the end. But that's a bit extreme to say if you want to do a 20-year-old double maturation. Imagine being 20 years in a Amarone cask, 20 years in a bourbon cask. It's going to be 40 years old, the whiskey. But this is where the guys like Ian with their noses and their experience and knowing the casks and testing the casks ultimately come together with the tasting team and just the panel and just say, well, you know, we think it's ready. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, but slightly.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, these guys really know the casks, and that's why we use quite a lot of wine casks, because Ian actually started off in the wine industry. So he's ended up using these Pinot Noir, Merlot, Amarone, and Tempranillo casks because these are wines and it's casks that he's familiar with, that he's confident will have a positive influence on Glencadam spirit.
I think if you're going to the extreme in wine casks, if you did an Amarone to a Pinot Noir, and if you had a glass of Amarone red wine, and a glass of Pinot Noir, you'd go, well, one's heavy, full-bodied, and the other one's delicate and light, and so that would reflect in the casks of the whiskey as well. So maybe that's why people, the Pinot Noir is maybe not quite as popular, because it doesn't give that punch, might give it a bit of lightness and fruitiness to it. Whereas your Amarone is big, bold, and there it is. And same with the sherry, the PX against maybe a Fino or something that's totally different. Got the two side by side.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, that's quite a big reason why we do this range as well, is to have all of these different cask types kind of available at the same time for people to be able to compare them amongst each other. So you do have the opportunity to go and compare an Amarone to a Pinot Noir or a Merlot and see how they all affect Glencadam spirit, because we're not the only ones who have used these casks before, but for us to have this big a range out all at the same time, it gives you guys quite an exciting opportunity to compare everything and see how it works. And
so like that Amarone cask that was used and it's now emptied, would that be used again?
Yes, although it won't be used again for this bottling. It will be used again for maybe an older one, because I'm sure quite a lot of us are aware, but casks are kind of like tea bags. The more you use it, the less it's got in it the next time. So we will use it again, but it won't be for the non-age statement Amarone cask finish. It will maybe be for an age statement, and it's maybe been left for 3 or 4 years or 5 years this time in Amarone. But like I said, to be honest, this is me speculating now as well, because they don't tell me nothing, because I would just come out here and tell you guys anything. Anyway.
It's a need to know thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But Cameron's coming to the distillery. Shh, don't tell him nothing.
But yeah, we will be using them again. It will just be for a different line.
Not for another one. They won't use that cask again for that product.
Yeah, exactly. Because all of the casks that have been used in this are first fill Amarone casks. So to replicate this bottling, we would need to do it again with first fill Amarone casks. But then that doesn't stop us from making another line, maybe an age statement down the line, which uses these second fills, which will actually benefit more from having a bit longer in the cask, because it's a second fill. It's had that initial punch taken out of it. And it will just help it develop a bit over time.
There's a question from Andy there coming up on the screen.
when developing a whiskey or choosing casks, is the nose of it considered important, or is it all on the taste? Are we talking about the nose
on the cask?
of the cask, like when we
Cask,
get
I
the
think.
cask delivery? Yes, I would say very important,
Yeah,
because
I think that.
you can really tell before you fill a cask if a cask is shot or not. If it's no good, if the quality of the wood is no good, it is very important. So actually, really good point, because this segues nicely into me talking about Ian's holidays. So all of these in this range that we've got with our sherry casks, our wine casks, our Madeira casks, our port casks, because Angus Dundee Distillers, so Angus Dundee Distillers is the company that owns Glencadam and Tomintoul. I'll talk a wee bit about them later on as well. But because we're a relatively small company, we buy our casks in quite small parcels, and for the most part, we buy them direct from the producers as well. So that means Ian gets to go to Spain or to Porto or to Madeira, and he gets to go to the producers and have a look at their casks and make sure that these casks are, one, good quality, and that they are actually what is being sold to him. Because there have been a few instances before where someone's phoned Ian up and they've said, "Oh, we've got some really good Oloroso casks for you here," and then he'll turn up and they're not Oloroso casks, or it's something else. And there was even an instance where it was Oloroso casks, but to keep the casks wet, because if you leave your casks out in the sun for too long, it means the wood's basically going to go off if the wood dries out. So you do kind of need to, once the cask is empty, you need to fill it with whiskey quite quickly after that. But because these casks were already empty, what this bodega had decided to do was they filled these casks with a different style of wine into these, what was supposed to be Oloroso sherry casks. So when Ian came over, or went over, and he looked at these casks, yes, fair enough, on the end of the casks it said Oloroso casks, and they were Oloroso casks. They had held Oloroso for a significant amount of time beforehand. But then he popped the cask open, stuck his nose in the bung, and the wine that was inside the cask was not Oloroso. It was a completely different type of wine, because, like I said, that bodega had just filled the cask to keep the wood wet. But the problem is that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for a cask with purely Oloroso influence, whereas now that cask is going to have the Oloroso influence, but it's also going to have now kind of a surface level influence from that other style of wine that bodega had ended up filling it up with. So yes, the nose of a cask is considered very important in terms of the quality of the cask, and being able to kind of predict what kind of direction that whiskey is going to go in. But you can never predict these things as well, because casks are completely unpredictable. Wood is a natural resource. It's not made in a lab. You can't guarantee what flavors you're going to get out of them. So as good as a cask might smell or appear to be, it could end up just being absolutely terrible down the line. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about that at all. Now, we are going to head on to the next dram, because we have kind of stuck on the Amarone for a little while, but hopefully everyone enjoyed the Amarone. For me personally, similar to the Pinot Noir, I think the Amarone is a little bit of an unsung hero of our non-age statement range, just because I think it's got a really nice amount of complexity to it. Whereas the PX, like I said, the PX is our best seller in this non-age statement range, because PX has got that nice big kind of treacly and sweet and dried fruity hit to it. So it generally kind of attracts quite a big crowd. Now, the next dram that we're doing, so the first two drams that we've tried, they're two newer releases from Glencadam Distillery. And they're a different style and a different expression of Glencadam. Whereas what we're jumping onto now is core range Glencadam, Glencadam 15. So Glencadam 15, so like I said at the start, Glencadam 10 is a really good example of Glencadam's distillery DNA and the distillery profile, right? So the 15 is also a really good way of showcasing Glencadam's spirit type, except the difference between the 15 and the 10 obviously 5 years, but also we've used a little bit, well, quite a lot more first fill bourbon casks in the 15-year-old. So what you get with the 15 is you get a lot more of the flavors that you would expect to come with a bourbon cask. So your vanillas and your honeys, you get a lot of that coming through with the 15, but you've still got that backbone of Glencadam being really bright and tropical and fruity with your pineapples and your bananas and a little bit of citrus. I personally would definitely say there's more of that citrus hanging about in the 10-year-old, whereas the older Glencadam gets, I find that citrusy note and the fresh fruity side of things tends to teeter off when you get to the older age statements. And in terms of it teetering off, it changes from like fresh fruits more into stewed fruits. So especially when you get to the 18. So if you get to the 18 really is like the middle of a warm apple pie. It's absolutely beautiful. And the 18 is also, and we're going on a little bit of a tangent, I'll bring it back to the 15 in a minute. But the 18 is in quite a nerdy way, is a really exciting comparison to the 10-year-old, because I think something that you really just don't get too often in a lot of distilleries is the cask ratios for the 10 and the 18 are exactly the same. So the 10 and the 18 both use 40% first fill bourbon casks, and then the rest is a mixture of refills, second fills, third fills. So I think when you do a vertical tasting for a lot of distilleries, so if you're working up through the ages, a lot of the time when you're going through core range of a distillery, when it gets older, they start sneaking in a bit of sherry to make it a bit darker, to make it look a bit more premium, and it also kind of buffs up the flavour quite a lot as well when you pop in sherry casks. So it's very rare to get a true representation of what age is doing to a spirit. And even with, I mean, I'm not going to sit here again and say we're the only ones that do this, because to be perfectly honest, I don't know who else does this. But I haven't heard of anybody else who does it. But when you go through the older age statements for different distilleries, even if they are fully matured in bourbon casks, they are going to have played about with the cask ratios. So it's very rare to have the exact same cask ratio for like a 10 and an 18-year-old like we do, where the only difference between those two lines is 8 years, which I think in quite a nerdy way and maybe a bit of a sad way, I think is really exciting, because you can see like firsthand that Glencadam 10 being bright, tropical, fruity, and a little bit zippy and citrusy. And then you compare that to the 18, where it turns into more kind of stewed fruits, and there's a load of spice that starts coming through with it as well. It's absolutely beautiful. Williams just said, different gravy, this lovely vanilla, apple, and a bit of cinnamon on the finish with the 15, of course. And you're spot on. So like I was saying, with the 18 bringing in more of that spice, it's the same with the 15. The 15 really does start to get a good bit of spice, like your cinnamons and your nutmegs starting to sneak through, just because it's had a little bit extra time in the cask. But like I said, this has got quite a high proportion of first fill bourbons. Our master blender, Ian, he's been trying to get this to catch on as a bourbon bomb for quite a while now. I'm not sure it's stuck, but we'll let him carry on with it for now. But it is an absolutely beautiful whiskey, and it really does showcase a nice balance between Glencadam spirit type with the bright tropical fruity side, and then the actual cask influence with the big kind of bourbon cask finish, that maturation that's coming through with this as well. Now, in terms of Glencadam as an actual distillery, I should probably talk about that for a little bit. So Glencadam was built in 1825. So this year is our 200th anniversary. So it's quite a big year for us. And at the distillery, we make about 1.3 million litres of spirit. Now that sounds like a lot. And most of my tastings, I'm standing up in front of people and saying that Glencadam is a teeny tiny distillery, which it is. It is a very, very small distillery. But 1.3 million litres compared to your more modern distilleries, which are popping up now, is quite a colossal amount compared to some guys like where is it? Ballandalloch. Those guys are making something like 80,000 litres a year, which is ridiculous. So comparing like 80,000 to 1.3 million makes me seem like a bit of an idiot when I'm saying that 1.3 million is very small. But in the grand scheme of things, compared to your Glenlivets and your Macallans and Glenfiddicks, who are all upwards of 20 million litres now, we still really are a small distillery compared to the big guys. But now there's just even more teeny tiny distilleries, which makes us look a little bit bigger than we are. But like I said, Glencadam was built in 1825, and it is currently owned and hopefully is owned for the rest of its time by Angus Dundee Distillers. But it was bought in 2003. So Angus Dundee Distillers bought the distillery in 2003 off of Allied Domecq. Allied Domecq are now part of Pernod Ricard. And when Allied Domecq had the distillery, they, like many people, I guess, are especially around that period as well, were really quite financially driven. So anything that was deemed mildly inefficient would be, or even like not entirely necessary, was ripped out, because whiskey tourism still really wasn't big at the time. So Glencadam used to be completely powered by a water wheel. It's an internal water wheel as well. It's the only, it's quite a niche, where we're the only distillery in Scotland that's got an internal water wheel. Deanston had one, but they're an external water wheel. But yeah, so we had a water wheel, and Allied Domecq ripped the water wheel out. The distillery also used to have loads of wooden washbacks, and they were all replaced with stainless steel washbacks. But with this being our 200th anniversary, part of the celebration for Glencadam turning 200 is we're in the middle of building a visitor centre at Glencadam Distillery, because up until, well, not even now, but up until in about 2 months' time, Glencadam has never taken tours or had a visitor centre or done tours. You would only ever be able to get to go around the distillery by appointment, and usually you'd have to be like a customer, or you would have to be part of a whiskey club. So I know Drambusters have been up before. With the recent shifts in the industry, has Glencadam changed its production output, or are you guys still at normal production? Are you producing at full capacity, and is there room for increased output? Another good question. I'll come back to that in a second. So yeah, with the 200th anniversary, we're in the middle of building a visitor centre, so as we can actually get people up to the distillery to see it, because it's a beautiful distillery. It is absolutely stunning, and it really does feel like a museum. When you're going around the distillery, it genuinely feels like you're just being transported back to the 1820s, because of just how old school the distillery is. Everything is still hand operated, and everything is quite jumbled as well, because when Glencadam was built back in 1825, obviously tourism was not even remotely on their minds for a distillery. So they weren't thinking, oh, how's a tour going to run through this? Like, I'm sure a lot of you have been on distillery tours, and you know that you start at the Porteous Patent Mill, you head into the mash tun, and then the washbacks in the still room. You're going to see all of those things at least 3 or 4 times when you're at the distillery, because everything is just kind of jumbled about, because the distillery was effectively just built to fit. Because back in 1825, the land that Glencadam Distillery is built on is an old farm. And they had a building. They had the old farm building, the old barn. They just had to fit all the machinery in the building. So it is quite jumbled. It's a bit like a maze when you're doing the tour. But again, that all just adds to that charm, the historical charm. Now, because Glencadam has these 200 years of history, the history is really important to us at Glencadam. So over the past couple of years, and still kind of extending into the next couple of years, Angus Dundee Distillers have been investing quite a lot of money into trying to bring Glencadam back to that more traditional style that it was beforehand. So when Allied Domecq ripped out the water wheel, we've now just spent a silly amount of money putting the water wheel back in. And the blacksmith that we commissioned for this, we told him he had to use the exact same materials, and to make sure that the water wheel was as close as possible to one that would have been there in the 1820s. We're also in the process of putting in wooden washbacks back into the distillery. So as when people do come to the distillery, it will feel a lot more traditional, and we don't have the stainless steel washbacks anymore, and we've put the water wheel back in so as people can see roughly what it would have been like back in the 1820s. Now, although the water wheel used to fully power the distillery back in the 1820s, it doesn't create anywhere nearly enough energy to fully power a water wheel. And it wasn't even powering the distillery off of electricity back then, like converting it into electricity and putting it into the distillery. It was all off of like pulleys and cranks and chains going all over the place. Whereas now you just can't work a distillery like that. So we are converting the power that the water wheel creates back into electricity and putting it back into the distillery. So in a sense, part of the water wheel is powering part of the distillery. It just can't do it all anymore. But like I said, we've done a lot of this investment just to just to try and make the tour experience when people are coming to the distillery as kind of authentic as possible, and trying to show people what the distillery would have looked like back in the 1820s. So everything that previous owners had ripped out, we've popped back in. And with changing from stainless steel to wooden washbacks, this does also mean that that this type of spirit, the style of spirit, will very slightly change. But for us, it's going to change in a positive way, and it's just going to help enhance these kind of tropical flavors. Now, the last question has just disappeared, but if I remember correct, there we go. So have we changed our production output? Are we still at normal production and producing at full capacity? And is there room for increased output? So yes, we are still at full capacity at Glencadam. So with us only making 1.3 million litres of spirit, that isn't a huge amount of spirit in the first place. Like I said, it is on the smaller side, whereas a lot of these bigger distilleries that we're seeing starting to close down, they're making pretty colossal amounts of spirit. So I think it's Chuninic is one of the more recent Diageo ones that I've seen kind of reel back on their production. And that's just because they will have made enough this year where they'll go into a bit of a silent season and then they'll reopen again. But they make such a colossal amount of spirit where they kind of, well, not really can afford to. They can't afford to not shut down for a bit, apparently, all of the money Diageo has chucking about. But yeah, so we are still fully at capacity at Glencadam. So we don't have any plans to reel back on production. If anything, it would be great for us to amp up production at Glencadam because So Angus Dundee Distillers is at heart a blending company, so we do still use a good portion of Glencadam and Tomintoul spirit for our blends. I'll touch on that later on as well. So we would love to increase production because at the moment we use every drop of Glencadam that we have because we don't have much of it in the first place. But the problem is, like we touched on earlier, Glencadam is completely surrounded by graveyards. So there's no room for us to increase production. We can't buy up the land around us to increase production. And I know I said that we're building a visitor centre, and you would have thought, well, why couldn't we have put a few more stills at the visitor centre? So the visitor centre, where that is now, used to be the old distillery manager's house. Don't worry, we didn't evict him to build a visitor centre. He had moved out long ago anyway. It was just kind of sitting empty. So we had a choice. I mean, the position of this old distillery manager's house and the size of it really wasn't enough to increase production. So even though we're building a visitor centre, it is quite a small visitor centre. We've just had to build up a little bit so as we've got a bit of space. But yeah, we'd love to increase production, but we just can't at the moment.
I think when people say, well, can you increase production? You've got to think, well, wait a minute. Before we increase production, we need to build a warehouse or warehouses. We need to get the casks. So before we can increase production, we need some form of casks to put the liquid in. So it's not just a case of, let's just increase production. You've got to think years in advance before you increase it. But
it literally doubles.
You were talking about the water wheel. I think this is just my point to say. If you, a minute, I'll try and get this.
Have you got your badge? There we go.
Hey, pin badge. We do have pin badges in the shop. So if you buy a bottle of Glencadam, you can get a lovely pin badge of the water wheel while stocks last of the pin badges. Just a wee extra thing there.
Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, so the water wheel has now become quite a focal point for us. So that's why we've got it on the badges. It's now the new logo for Glencadam. We just kind of updated our branding a touch just for some new font and a new logo. So that's our new logo now. And also, when you do a tour at the distillery, we've built a glass panel over the water wheel, so you can walk over it and peer down into it, kind of churning away, which will be cool. And it's got a big, massive door on the side of it that you can open, and you can chuck a dram in there if you want. I don't know if that's the kind of nonsense people are going to start doing when we do open for tours. You never know. I did also see a question pop up about have we always been in production, which is a great question, because with us being 200 years old, there is a lot of distilleries who are like 200 or 150 years old that have only actually been operating for about 50 of those years or less. One good example of that is my old employer. So I used to work for Annandale Distillery. Good distillery, beautiful distillery to visit as well. So I would highly recommend, since you guys are all in the area, if you've not been, make the trip down there. It is beautiful, good spirit as well. But they were established, I think it was like 1836 or something like that. But they had been closed between 1914 and 2014. So there was quite a big gap in their production. And that was mainly just because the war shut things down, and then it just never reopened. Johnny Walker sold the distillery. Whereas with Glencadam, there have been a few small closures here or there, but nothing monumental, no long-term closures. They've all been for a couple of years at a time, and that's it. There's been a few fires, as there is at every distillery, that have shut the distillery down for a little while. But the most recent closure was in between 2000 and 2003. The distillery was mothballed by Allied Domecq for 3 years. The only employee on site was a distillery manager, and he turned the front lawn into a putting green and was just working on his short game. But other than that, the distillery really hasn't been closed for big periods at a time at all. So, yeah, it has been producing the whole time.
That is a cracking bourbon bomb. I think I said to you last week, I think, when we were doing the tasting, I said to you that's the bourbon bomb. And you went, oh, that's what Ian's going to try to call it.
Yeah. So at least it's stuck with someone. It's resonating with someone at least.
Yeah.
But I mean, it really is.
It's a great example of a bourbon cask.
Yeah.
Without doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I personally am on quite a big bourbon cask kick for myself at the moment.
Yeah.
I just love the fruity style that most distilleries tend to like. Well, so for me, we're going off piste here, but like I really am enjoying like a Bowmore in a bourbon cask. Beautiful, it's bright and tropical, and then same with like Glengarry that's fully matured in a bourbon cask. It's just fantastic. I just really like that bright and tropical fruity side of whiskey. Ballandalloch as well. I mentioned them earlier. This bottle here, bourbon cask, beautiful. It's again just really kind of bright and tropical, and that's a huge reason why I like Glencadam, because of that bright tropical fruity side to it. I mean, the Glencadam 10 for me was the first dram that really actually opened my eyes to like the flavors that whiskey could have in it. So the Glencadam
comment earlier on was the 15-year-olds like the 10-year-old but on steroids.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really good dram.
Whereas number 4 is a complete comparison to it, isn't it?
Good segue, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a really good comparison to it with number 4, because number 4 is also 15 years old.
Yeah.
But this one has spent 12 years in a bourbon cask, and then it spent 3 years in Oloroso sherry casks. So you get a really nice balance between, you still get a nice, so that kind of tropical fruity side of Glencadam develops more into kind of like orange peels, and like you still get a bit of that banana coming through as well, but it's almost more like what do you call it, like candied bananas or something. It's like the sugared ones. And then you get your big Oloroso flavors coming through as well, with your dried fruits and your nuts and your wee bit of spice as well. And it is just a really good contrast to the core range 15-year-old, because you're getting kind of both sides of Glencadam with that nice big sherry influence from the Oloroso, and then you've got the 15 with your full bourbon cask maturation. But this 15-year-old, the 15-year-old Reserva de Jerez, or Jerez, if you want to be fancy about it, this is part of our aged cask finishing range. So the non-age statement cask finishing range that we started on, that was all kicked off by the Reserva Andalucia, which is our non-age statement Oloroso cask finish. I think it goes up here. So the non-age statement cask finishing range was kicked off by this one, the light baby blue coloured Glencadam. And the reason that came out is because it was all of Glencadam's core range, everything widely available, I say widely available from Glencadam was fully matured in a bourbon cask. So people were wanting something, and we had done a few cask finishes before, but they were all limited releases, and it was one of those kind of once they're gone situations, whereas people wanted something a bit more consistent from Glencadam, which was in a different cask type to a bourbon. Even though I've just been talking about how well Glencadam works in a bourbon cask, people just wanted to see something slightly different from us. So we brought out the Reserva Andalucia, and it went really, really well. So that's what kind of kicked off the rest of the non-aged cask finishing range, where we used tons of different cask types that we felt would positively influence Glencadam's spirit. But like we touched on earlier, with reusing those casks, we wouldn't reuse them to make the exact same SKU, because the liquid would come out different, because the cask is going to have less influence. So we then would use them to make an older age statement like this one, the 15-year-old. But we haven't just used the refills for this one. It's been a mixture of first fills and refills, whereas the non-age range, I believe, is entirely first fills. And then when you get into the age statements, it's a mixture of first fills and refills of those cask types. So you get a mixture of that kind of big influence coming from the first fill Oloroso casks as a finish, and then you get that more, not muted, but that less intense influence from the refill side of things. And like I said, that birthed the kind of the aged cask finishing side. And to be honest, I think the aged cask finishing side as well is, again, a perfect example of us making sure whiskey is ready to be bottled when we bottle it. Because the 17-year-old PX, which if anyone's got a bottle at home, it is bonkers. It's beautiful. It's got a purple label on it, and it's just so ridiculously dark. It's an amazing whiskey. It is in like completely, it's a sherry bomb, and it's beautiful. But that's now completely sold out, so we don't have any more left. But that's almost 18 years old. It's around 17 years and 9 or 10 months. But because these were PX quarter casks with that one, they really have quite a lot of influence quite quickly. So Ian was keeping a very close eye on these casks as they were progressing. And even though it was at 17 years and 9 months or 10 months, the liquid was ready to be bottled then. So we bottled it as a 17-year-old. Instead of waiting an extra 3 months to get it up to an 18-year-old and chuck a higher price on it and make a bigger margin, we released it at 17 and 9 months old or 10 months old, because that's when the spirit was ready. So like I said, we're all about making sure the liquid and the spirit is ready to be bottled when it actually gets bottled, instead of just trying to hit like your typical 12, 15, 18, 21 age statements. So actually, I did a tasting at the House of Malt in Carlisle about a couple of weeks ago. And when I was talking about that, someone at that tasting was like, so instead of an age statement, it's a taste statement. And I thought that's just a really good way to put it. Because even though this one as well has got an age statement on it, these really are just more about the taste and the flavour for these whiskies. So yes, it's more of a taste statement. I just saw someone mention the Glencadam 13, the Reawakening. That is a beautiful dram. again, that's fully matured in bourbon casks. But that came out because of that closure period that I was on about, where between 2000 and 2003, Glencadam Distillery was not producing. So that means we had a 3-year gap in our stocks. So eventually, when Angus Dundee Distillers did buy Glencadam Distillery, it meant that once we got into our 15-year-olds and so on, there was going to be a period that we would hit where the distillery wasn't producing 15 years ago, so we wouldn't have 15-year-old stock for 3 years. So there was a small period where we completely ran out of 15-year-old spirit. So as a bit of a stopgap, we brought out the 13-year-old, the Reawakening, and to replace the 15 until we had 15-year-old spirit. So that 13-year-old is the first spirit that Glencadam produced under the ownership of Angus Dundee Distillers. And in a weird kind of full circle way for me, that was and I'm not shitting you when I say this. I'm not saying it just because Glencadam pays the bills, keeps the lights on. The Glencadam 13 was genuinely the first bottle of whiskey that I had actually. So I'd bought like supermarket bottles of whiskey before, but it was the first bottle of whiskey that I'd actually went and spent what I thought was a lot of money on. And it was the first bottle of whiskey that I actually bought from like a whiskey shop as well. Reason for that is because this must have been about 6 or 7 years ago now. But when I was first dating my now fiance, we went away on like a wee holiday with her family, and her dad paid for the whole thing, and he was like refusing. The man was refusing to take money for anything, and I just felt terrible. So I was like, I know what you'll like. You'll like a bottle of whiskey. So I went into a whiskey shop in the area, and I was completely a sucker for the marketing for the 13-year-old, because it comes in a gold tin. So straight away, that's what was screaming to me from the shelf. And it says limited edition on the bottle. I don't think it says limited edition anymore, because when we were going to bring the 15-year-old back, it meant that the 13-year-old should have been discontinued. But because the 13-year-old had ended up getting its own following, we decided to keep it. So I don't think it says limited edition on the bottle anymore. But yeah, at the time, gold tube, it said limited edition, and it had quite a compelling story on the back of it as well, telling you about how it's the first spirit since the distillery's reopened. So I was like, that's the one. He's going to love that. And he did. He drank the whole thing, and I didn't get a single dram out of it. But yeah, I always find it quite funny that was one of the first bottles of whiskey that I ever really bought, and it was a Glencadam. And now here I am doing tastings for Glencadam, which is quite fun. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the 15-year-old. What do you think, Brian? How are you finding the 15-year-old? It is.
Yeah, well, I do have a sweet tooth. I always am a PX sherry fan, to be honest. But over the years, I'm definitely turning from PX sherry to bourbon. But I mean, this has got a lovely richness and sweetness to it. It suits my palate. Although absolutely nothing wrong with a 15-year-old BB. I would go a BB for me. But each to their own. There is a wee bit in difference in price, so obviously, which reflects the fact that it's a sherry cask that you're been finishing off, because sherry casks, presumably, are more expensive than the bourbon cask. And
so to be fair, with the price thing, I did have someone ask me about this last week on Friday as well. Yeah. Because so what are the prices at again? Just as a reminder,
the 15-year-old is normally £70 and is offered at £63, and this one is £108 and offered at £95. So the difference with the offer price is £23 a bottle difference between. Yeah. Oh, and that's on the offer price. On the retail price is £38 of a difference.
Right. So in terms of the price difference between the two, the reason for that is because regular 15-year-old is core range. This is always going to be available, and you'll always be able to get this, except unless there's any more closures, which I hope there aren't. Whereas with the 15-year-old Jerez, you can see on the little thing in the corner as well. But this is a limited run of bottles, so once these are done, they're done, and all the bottles they're individually numbered as well. But there's 9,000 bottles in the run, and once they're done, that's kind of it. So yeah, that's I guess the explanation for the price difference is just because it's a limited run. Because, like I said before this non-age statement range, everything that was a aged cask finish were usually kind of one and done type things. Mm-hmm. Although I think there have been other bottlings of this from different years, but this is just the limited run from 2007. So that's the kind of the explanation, price difference.
Yeah, lovely dram though.
So I hosted a whiskey dinner a couple of weeks ago as well, and like you said, Brian, because this is quite a sweet dram, this was the final dram. Went with the dessert, and dessert was also sticky toffee pudding, so it just goes hand in hand.
Aye, much made in heaven.
Yeah, it's a beautiful dram. Also goes really well for anybody in the tasting who smokes cigars. This does go very well with a cigar, just because the Oloroso influence brings in that little bit of spice and the sweetness as well. So it does tend to work very well with a cigar. But we also do have a cigar malt, which is made by Tomintoul Distillery. We're not actually tasting the cigar malt tonight, but for anybody in the tasting who hasn't tried the Tomintoul cigar malt, I would massively recommend it.
Are we not bringing it to the festival? I think
we should be. I think so.
Yep.
If we're not, it's me who's going to be at the festival, so I'll bring a bottle for you.
No,
anyway.
I think it's down for one of the bottles for the festival.
Good. Good. Yep. I mean, it's a beautiful dram, and to be honest, I know you shouldn't pick favourites, but in terms of core range, Tomintoul, for me, the cigar malt is really just right up my street. I love it. It's a beautiful dram. I don't really smoke cigars, but you don't need to smoke a cigar to enjoy that whiskey, because it's just such a beautiful, well-balanced, well-rounded whiskey. It's got that little bit of peat, big Oloroso influence, and it's got a little bit of that kind of aged Tomintoul stock in there as well. So it is beautiful.
And I think we're also, when you were talking about the 15-year-old Glencadam, I think they're actually doing the 18-year-old at the festival as well.
Oh, we're doing the 18 at the festival as well.
I think I was one of the ones you were doing. Yeah, so even though we're trying them tonight, there's going to be whiskies at your stands that we're not trying tonight, that people can come along and taste them as well. So
make sure you come along and say hello. And if anybody didn't get any pin badges or key rings, I'll bring a few to have on the table at the stand as well. So make sure you come along and say hello. Get a key ring, get a cigar malt, or the Glencadam 18.
Well, thank you for us visiting Glencadam.
Not at all. But we've already kind of started touching on Tomintoul, so we might as well get stuck into Tomintoul. So, dram number 5. Now, I would recommend for everyone in the tasting that with this dram, I would have a glass of water before you go into this dram, because the Glencadam 15 Oloroso is it's quite a big, powerful, spicy, dense, complex style of whiskey. And the next one we're going on to, dram number 5, which is Tomintoul 16, is, to be honest, as light as you can get. It's such a light and easy drinking whiskey. It's just beautiful. It's an amazing whiskey. And like I said at the start of the tasting, most tastings that I do, if I'm doing dual branded tastings and I've got Glencadam and I've got Tomintoul with me, I mostly start off with Tomintoul because it's a lighter style of whiskey. It's really light, approachable and gentle. We even brand it as the gentle dram. But like I said, most of the drams we're having tonight from Tomintoul are a much heavier and like denser style of Tomintoul. So it wouldn't have made any sense to start off with these drams. But the only one that we're doing, which is that lighter, more gentle style, is the Tomintoul 16. The reason we're doing the Tomintoul 16 is because I think it would almost be sacrilege to do a Tomintoul tasting and not do the 16. Because the Tomintoul 16 is similar to the Glencadam 15. Tomintoul 16 is the distillery's DNA in a bottle. It is the perfect representation of Tomintoul Distillery. If anybody tells me that they at a festival they've never tried or heard of Tomintoul Distillery, I usually will go for the 16 to kick them off, which is quite weird with a 16-year-old being like the flagship malt for a range. But it's just such a beautiful whiskey. It's so easy drinking. So the main contrast between Tomintoul and Glencadam Distillery is the size and shape of stills. So like I said with Glencadam, the stills that we've got at Glencadam are quite short, fat and stumpy, and they've got the ascending line arm. Tomintoul Distillery couldn't be more opposite. Tomintoul Distillery, the stills are gigantic. We've got unofficially the second tallest stills in Scotland up at Tomintoul. The reason I say unofficially is because I was in Bunnahabhain at the start of this year, and they were also claiming to have the second tallest stills in Scotland. So someone's lying, and I don't know who, but it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that we've got very, very tall stills. Obviously, Glenmorangie, they've got the tallest stills in Scotland, so they're very well known for making a really light style of spirit. Their swan necks are the average height of a giraffe's neck. So they nickname their stills the giraffes, and they even pay a little bit to a giraffe foundation every year as well. But our stills are just a little bit shorter, not by much. But basically, the reason these really tall stills are important is because essentially the taller the still, the lighter the style of spirit you're going to get. So because those heavier and denser alcohols, they will run out of breath halfway up the still. They'll get recondensed back into a liquid, run down the inside of the still, and get redistilled and make it up to the top of the still as a lighter style of spirit. So essentially, only the lightest style of alcohols will make it into the spirit with Tomintoul. Now, the 16-year-old, again, like the Glencadam 15, this is fully matured in bourbon casks. So you will get a lot of your honeys and your vanillas that you would expect from a bourbon cask. But Tomintoul also makes a really kind of creamy and buttery and nutty style of spirit. So it's kind of like panna cotta, creme brulee, little bit custardy. And again, you've got those nutty flavours kicking about in the background. And it is just such an easy drinking whiskey. It also goes a bit amazing in a highball. It goes really well in a highball just because of that lighter style. And a highball is such a nice light and crisp style of drink. So it just works really well. Now, the 16-year-old is the creation of a very important person at Tomintoul Distillery. So it's the creation of Robert Fleming. I don't know if any of us have heard of Robert Fleming. He doesn't tend to like the spotlight too much, but he has just celebrated, as of 2 years ago, Robert has just celebrated his 50th, not 2 years, as of last year, he has just celebrated his 50th year in the industry. And so he's our master distiller. He's in charge of both Tomintoul and Glencadam distilleries. There are distillery managers at each distillery, but he's kind of in charge of things. But yeah, he's done 50 years in the industry, all of it up in Speyside, specifically in the Glenlivet area. But not only that, not only has he worked in the industry for 50 years, but he's a fourth generation distiller as well. So before him, his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather had all spent their entire lives working up in the whiskey industry up in Speyside. Again, for the most part, all up in the Glenlivet area. Now, that is also something to touch on. So on all of our bottles, it says Speyside Glenlivet on all of our bottles. That's not, at a lot of shows, I get a lot of people thinking that we're part of Glenlivet Distillery, or it's maybe an independent bottling of Glenlivet Distillery, or we're owned by the same people as Glenlivet Distillery. None of that. It is literally the area that we're in. The valley, the glen that we are in is Glenlivet. But Tomintoul Distillery was built in 1965, whereas the Glenlivet, they were the first legally recognised distillery in Scotland, so I think they got their licence in 1824, so they could call themselves whatever they wanted. Selfish bastards went for the whole Glen, so nobody else can call themselves Glenlivet after that. No, actually, nobody can even put Glenlivet on their labels except for 4 distilleries. It might have changed now with other distilleries opening up, but previously what used to happen was tons of distilleries, especially in the Speyside area, would put Glenlivet on their bottles, in a sense, to try and ride the coattails of Glenlivet, because before the 1823 Excise Act, I can't remember which king, but one of the kings of England, he came up to Scotland and he had heard about the illicit Glenlivet whiskey and how good quality it was. And even though it was illegal, even though they weren't paying their taxes, the king still wanted a dram of the Glenlivet. So there's a record somewhere that says that the king requested some of the Glenlivet whiskey, the illicit Glenlivet whiskey. And because that essentially gave Glenlivet the royal approval, tons of other Speyside distilleries started putting Glenlivet on their labels, until eventually the SWA came around and threatened to sue everyone who wasn't in the actual Glenlivet. They threatened to sue everyone else for putting Glenlivet on their labels unless they were actually in Glenlivet. So Tomintoul Distillery is one of 4 distilleries at the moment who are legally allowed to put Glenlivet on our bottles, and that is purely because that is the area that we're in. That generally tends to confuse a lot of international visitors, because they don't realise that a glen is just a valley or an area. But the distillery is Tomintoul, and that is how you pronounce it, Tomintoul. There's been a bit of confusion before, but it does say on the back of the tin that it's pronounced Tomintoul. The distillery is named after the village Tomintoul, which is just up the road. So that's also where the majority of our staff come from the village. And Tomintoul Distillery is still a fully hand-operated distillery as well. Even though it was built in 1965 as a modern style of distillery, it is still fully hand-operated. There's no automation whatsoever in the distillery. There is a huge control panel, which doesn't do anything, does nothing. All it does is it's got some flashing, blinking lights on it, which will literally just tell you which valve is open and which is not. It doesn't open the valves for you. You don't press a button and open the valves. It tells you which valves are open. And the staff at the distillery don't even trust it. They will still see the light blinking saying the valve is open, and they'll still go over to the valve to make sure it's open before they actually start running spirit through or anything like that, which does tend to make our staff very poachable. Good question from Seb. I'll come back to that in a second as well. But that does tend to make our staff very poachable, because since it's a hand-operated distillery, all of the staff know distilleries inside and out. So it makes our staff poachable, because all of the other distilleries that are ran by computers, a lot of them are hiring staff who know how to run a distillery by a computer, but they don't necessarily know where everything is all the time. Not all the time. Some of the people, the people who are coming out of university to work straight into distilleries are still very clued up. But there was a situation where our current mashman up at Tomintoul Distillery, Josh, he had left for a different distillery, and he got called out of his bed at some silly time in the morning, like 3 a.m. or something like that, because there was an issue with production. Production had stopped, and it was a kid, basically. He asked the kid behind the computer, like, what's wrong, what's going wrong? And he was like pressing a button, and he was saying the valve isn't opening. And he was like, well, have you been to the valve to go and see what's wrong? And the kid was like, no, I don't know where the valve is. So he just took the kit, went over to the valve, got the big pole, popped it down, and opened the valve. And like I said, stuff like that has just made our staff very poachable. But Josh, like I said, he's our current mashman, so he's actually came back to the distillery because he found it too boring working at a distillery that's ran by computers. So first of all, the question from Seb, and then I'll answer your question, Andy. Yeah, good question, Seb, about the thought process in releasing the 16-year-old at 40%, assuming chill filtration. Yes, it is chill filtered instead of 46 or hiring and any colouring. So first of all, yes, it does have a little touch of colouring. It's not colouring to make the whiskey look darker or colouring to alter the flavour of the whiskey. So, like I said, I used to work for Annandale Distillery, right? And I'm sure you guys are, well, some of us at least will be familiar with Annandale, where everything they do is single cask and it's cask strength. So it's all obviously not chill filtered and it's not coloured. So when I joined Angus Dundee, working with Tomintoul, this is the first distillery I've worked for that's used colouring. So I didn't understand it. So I just asked Ian about colouring, what it does to the whiskey, what kind of impact it has, how much we put in, why we do it as well. And he, first of all, he gave me 2 glasses, one full of water, one full of Tomintoul 16, and then he gave me a pot of unflavoured caramel colouring and a teaspoon. And he was like, well, I'll let you learn by doing. And he said that he gave me a challenge to get that glass of water the same colour as the glass of Tomintoul 16. Now, straight away, I knew he was trying to set me up from doing that because he obviously realised I was coming in a little bit sceptical, thinking, why are we doing this? Why are we putting colouring in? So he thought, I'll just let this guy learn. So I was trying to be really conservative about it. So I took the teaspoon and I just dipped it in the colouring. So there was basically no colouring on the teaspoon. And then I dipped that teaspoon into the glass of water. And as soon as the teaspoon touched the glass of water, the whole glass went black. I think this is something that a lot of people don't, not everyone anyway, fully understands about caramel colouring, is how much of an influence on colour even the teeniest, tiniest bit of colouring can have on your whiskey. So we're not adding bucket loads of colouring into it. What actually happens is it's not Ian just with this paint pot of caramel colouring and just kind of guessing how much goes in. We'll run the whiskey through. So Tomintoul 16 will have a colour grading. And it has that colour grading. So as when you go into a shop and you see, it could even literally be 2 bottles beside each other. But let's, for argument's sake, say 12 bottles beside each other. 12 bottles, both from 2 different cases of 6. One case is from an old bottling and one case is from the most recent bottling. You would want those bottles to be the exact same colour. So as when those 2 cases are sat side by side on the shelf, they are the same colour. And there is consistency. Whereas if one is paler and one's darker, you're going to think something's gone wrong with them. So Tomintoul 16, because it is a bit more of we make a bit more volume of it, it does get a little bit of colouring just for the sake of consistency. I think we can all agree when looking at Tomintoul 16, we're not adding colouring into it to make it, try to see if I've got heavily sherried whiskey hanging about so I can show you. So we're not trying to make it really, really dark in colour to make people think that they're getting a richer whiskey than they are. We are literally just adding colouring for the sake of consistency. Now, like I said, Tomintoul is, we do make a bit more volume of Tomintoul, and that's when it relates into the 16-year-old being done at 40% and being chill filtered. To be perfectly frank with the 16-year-old, it's more to cater for a wider audience, to be perfectly honest with you guys. Because if everyone in the industry did everything at 46% and above, you're instantly cutting out really one of the biggest parts of your customer base. So you've got to have something which is kind of widely available to, well, not widely available, but something that is available for every section of your market. So that's why we do Tomintoul 16 at 40%, is just so as it's a nice approachable and gentle style of spirit. Like I said, we brand Tomintoul as the gentle dram. With Glencadam, we don't chill filter it, we don't add colouring, and it's all up at 46% because Glencadam is a very old traditional style of distillery. It was built in 1825. We don't want to mess about with the tradition that's involved at Glencadam. Tomintoul was built in 1965. So it is still old. Well, I don't want to say old. I don't want to offend anybody. But it's turning 60 this year, so it gets its bus pass. But because it was built as a modern distillery, there's a bit more room for us to play about with things. And with Tomintoul being the gentle dram, chill filtering it and releasing it at 40%, if anything, just helps kind of feed into that narrative that we're looking for with Tomintoul being the gentle dram. And we're not chill filtering it to make the whiskey bad. We're not chill filtering it to strip out all the flavour. I hope everyone would agree that the Tomintoul 16 is still quite a flavourful whiskey. Like I said, it's quite like buttery and creamy and custardy, and there's a lot of those nutty flavours coming through. So we're not chill filtering it to make it bland. We wouldn't actively make steps to make our whiskey bad, but we do deliberately make steps to make our whiskey a little bit more accessible and approachable. And then, so Andy has asked why the Tomintoul 16 has always been a good value. And is it because it's 40% ABV and can you produce more? So a big reason why it is good value, why you are able to get a 16-year-old at a good price. Yes, you're correct. Like we've touched on, because it is a little bit lower in strength, obviously the tax is going to be a little bit lower. To be on the boring side of whiskey and talk about the numbers. But yeah, it is more affordable because the tax is going to be a little bit lower because it's 40%. And also because, like I said earlier, we make Tomintoul 16 in a bit more volume to be a bit more, again, a bit of a brand building and a name building dram for us, to kind of get the name out there and get people to fall in love with it. So that's why we're able to keep it at a relatively affordable price. I'm not sure what it's being sold at tonight, but it usually sits around 65 to 75 pounds, which for a 16-year-old is a really good price point.
Yep. Tonight it's £62 a bottle.
£62 a bottle. Fantastic. Yep. It's a great price. And again, for a 16-year-old.
I've took the words right out of my mouth for a 16. Yeah. Karen's just been looking on her phone, if you don't mind me just comment on something. This was on January 2009. Glencadam has launched a new 15 and 10-year-old. The company has revised its cask strength process to produce a refined and elegant malt with soft sweetness, according to brand development director Duncan Baldwin. And we had a young man called Robert Fleming, distillery manager, came to do a tasting at Dumfries.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that was in 2009. Hell's bells, God almighty. So,
but yeah, I mean...
What school were you at in 2009?
2009, I think I might have been at the end of primary school in 2009.
Oh God!
No, I think it would have been. Yeah, I would have been at the end of primary school.
And did he hear of Glencadam or Tomintoul at school at that point? No, was that an interest that you could go to your headmistress, Miss? I know what I want to do.
I mean, to be fair, my dad liked to dram, but my dad's drama choice was Talisker. So that was really the only brand I'd ever heard of. But I'm not sure I would have even paid attention to the brand name when I was in primary school. Although, funnily enough, I had someone at a tasting of mine who was a guidance teacher at one of the local just one of the local schools. He was a guidance teacher. And after my tasting, he came up and he was saying, like, you should really think about coming and doing one of these talks for the school. And I was like, what? You're a guidance teacher. Why would I come along with 8 drams for the school and talk about whiskey? And he was like, no. He was like, I mean, as in like for a careers thing. And you know what? He's right. And you're right as well, Brian, because at that point, I had never heard of any of these brands. Even at the end of high school, I had never really heard of any whiskey brands at all. And I didn't realise how many jobs that the whiskey industry actually is responsible for. So I think that really is quite a good opportunity that is maybe missed at schools, is telling them about not to promote the whiskey, but more to tell them that there's actually loads of jobs in whiskey, whether it's marketing or sales or production.
Yeah, particularly production, I think, with distilling and the science of it and the biology of it with the yeasts and things.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to know your stuff, obviously. It's not just a case of putting some malted barley into a steep and getting on with it. It's quite technical, the process of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing
we're diversing from the fact. I just thought when Karen had that on the phone, just that we have had Mr. Fleming in the face.
Yeah. I mean,
you might not remember.
Robert is fantastic.
So, shall we move on to number 6?
Yeah, we probably should move on for the sake of time. So, number 6, an absolutely incredible dram. Wait, which dram is number 6?
The Tawny one.
Tawny, I'm on the wrong one. I had picked up the 14. Also, an incredible dram.
Yeah, it's the 15-year-old Tawny, port pipe.
Yeah, 15-year-old Tawny. Now, I realised I had made a slight blunder for this. I thought I had a bottle of the 15-year-old Tawny Port at home to show everyone online, but I don't. I've got the non-aged Tawny Port, which, as a very quick segue, is also delightful. But the 15-year-old Tawny Port is just the age statement of that non-aged one that I had there. And similar to the 15-year-old Oloroso Glencadam, the 15-year-old Tawny Port, this has spent 12 years in bourbon casks and then 3 years in these Tawny Port casks. And I'm sure you will all agree with me. The colour of it is absolutely outrageous. It looks like the sweet and sour sauce you get at the Chinese.
You know what? You're spot on. Absolutely spot on. Yep.
It's ridiculous. But it's such a tasty dram. And I'll be honest with you guys, I'm really biased here, because Tawny Port is my favourite kind of cask finish. I love it. I love straight, fully matured bourbon cask whiskies. But if I'm going into a cask finish, Tawny Port is just my style. I like, or just port in general, I guess. But I really love Tawny Port because I just like how juicy and jammy it can make a whiskey. And this one's just like cherries and berries and a little bit of chocolate going on as well. And I was saying to the guys when we were there last Friday, this goes absolutely amazing as a half and half with a pint of Guinness. It is just fantastic because those flavours just work incredibly together.
I didn't have to do that, by the way, and you're quite right. You forced me into it.
I mean, it's not me who's right, it's Ian. It was Ian who told me to do it. And I've never not been able to do it now. If I'm at a bar and even if they don't have Tomintoul Tawny Port, I'll try and find a port cask finished whiskey and have it with a pint of Guinness because it's just amazing. We remember that tasting as the young man explained how to pronounce Tomintoul. Which young man was that? Was that Ian or was that Robert in his younger days? Because he did say in that review that Karen had up, the young man from Tomintoul. The problem is with the pronunciation of Tomintoul is whatever you say, you're wrong. The good thing about that is whatever you say, you're right as well. Because, I mean, the official pronunciation for us, for the whiskey, is Tomintoul. But then you go up to the village, half of the village says Tomintoul, and the other half says Tomintoul. So it's like when you go to Islay, and half of the people on Islay will call it Islay, and the other half will call it Islay. You just can't win. Ian's even had people correct him. Like Ian used to be the global brand ambassador, and he is the master blender of the company, and he's had people correcting him, saying, "Oh, it's Tomintoul. You should know that. You work for the distillery. It's Tomintoul." But it's whatever you say, you're going to be wrong or right, depends on how you look at it. Now, in terms of the actual distillery, like I said, it's got these gigantic stills, which is one of the main kind of factors that really attracted Angus Dundee distillers towards buying Tomintoul Distillery. Because initially, when the owners of Angus Dundee, or the founders of Angus Dundee at that point, when they went up to Tomintoul to view the distillery, they actually didn't go up to view Tomintoul. They went up to view Tomintoul. So Tomintoul and Tomintoul Distillery were both owned by White and Mackay at that time. And Robert Fleming was actually the master distiller, or the distillery manager, over at Tomintoul. So the owners of Angus Dundee, they had went up to Tomintoul, and they just weren't sold on the place. It wasn't quite what they were looking for. So Robert Fleming said to them, look, while you're up here, while you're up in Speyside, White and Mackay, we've also got another distillery literally just over the hill called Tomintoul. And he was like, it's not for sale, but I'll show you around the distillery. And when the owners of Angus Dundee, or the founders of Angus Dundee, went around Tomintoul, they just fell in love with the place, and it was exactly what they were looking for. I don't know if anybody's been up to the area, but it's such a stunning part of Scotland. It's one of the few Speyside distilleries that is also in the Cairngorm National Park. So we're kind of at the top of the Cairngorms and at the bottom of Speyside. So there's that little overlap where we're still in the Cairngorms and we're still in Speyside. And it's just such a beautiful part of Scotland with these big rolling hills with the Cairngorms. And that's why, so a lot of the branding with Tomintoul is purple because of the heather, because the valley that we're in, all of the hills around us for a very short period in the middle of August go so outrageously purple. It's just stunning. So we couldn't not include that with the branding. So they fell in love with the area. And Tomintoul's also in the same area. So it's not just the area that sold them on it. But Tomintoul makes such a light and approachable style of whiskey that really was exactly what they were looking for. They wanted something that could stand up by itself as a single malt, but would also be really, really valuable to the blending side of the business. Because at this point, like I said, and even today, Angus Dundee Distillers is primarily a blending company, right? So it was really important for us. Well, they wanted to buy a distillery to get into the distilling side of things and to push a single malt, but they would have still needed to use a lot of that spirit for their own blends. So it was a massive thing for Angus Dundee to buy Tomintoul Distillery, because it meant finally they had control over some spirit that they made, and they weren't having to just make deals with everyone and make and kind of not bargain with everyone, I guess. It meant that they actually had their own spirit that they could use to bargain as well. So it was a huge step, but they also needed something that could be used for blending and for pushing as a single malt. So with Tomintoul making this really light and versatile style of spirit, that was one of the biggest selling points for them, because there was just so much potential with the distillery. Now, with Angus Dundee Distillers, with the blends that we make, I get a lot of people asking me, like, if we're primarily a blender, like, why haven't I heard any of your blends? So, like, yes, we don't have a Johnny Walker or a Grant's or a Grouse. We don't have any big blends that go everywhere. The way Angus Dundee operates is quite different to a lot of your other bigger blending companies. We're not known for one big blend. We do a lot of smaller blending projects specifically for those markets. I see Andy's just said there's a little bit sulphur in the tawny port finish. So I would agree. Potentially. So with a lot of port cask finishes, you do tend to get sometimes a little of a bitter note that comes through. And I would say I generally get this more often with tawny port than I do with ruby port, generally because the casks will just be a little bit older as well. Because tawny port can sit in casks for 30, 40 years or so, whereas ruby port generally doesn't sit in a cask for so long. So you will get a little bit more of a bitter or a savoury or like almost like a rancio style of note coming through in some port cask finishes, which, to be honest, isn't always a bad thing. It's like when you're cooking, sometimes you will use those kind of more rancio flavours to bring together the overall flavour profile. Where was I? Before the tawny port. We were blends. Yes. So we don't have one big blend that goes all over the world. We will we'll make individual blends catered for specific markets. So one really good example of that is this one here. It's called For Pete's Sake. So this is one of the blends that we actually made specifically for the Swedish market. And it ended up being the best-selling Scotch in Sweden for a while. I'm not sure if it's still up there, but it definitely was for a bit. And this, like I said, was just made for the Swedish market. But because of how popular it's been in Sweden, it has now started kind of bleeding into a few other markets. I had never actually worked with For Pete's Sake at all until about 6 months ago. I was doing a whiskey festival in Newcastle, and I looked at the dram list, the dram lineup for our stand beforehand, and I saw For Pete's Sake on it. And I was like, that's a bit odd. I've never worked with that before. It doesn't really go in the UK at all. But the retailer for that show had just bought some in off of us, so why not? We brought some. So it's actually a really good dram. I had never tried it at all until this show that I did up in Newcastle. So I had to try some of it before Newcastle so I could actually talk about the dram. And I was honestly really surprised by it because I think in general, so in the UK, it's about £30 a bottle, but it's supposed to retail. I think the price it sells in Sweden is maybe closer to about £20 a bottle. But the reason it's about £30 in the UK is because the only people you can actually buy it off of in the UK right now is Amazon, and they go through about 3 different people to end up getting it. So that's why it's jumped up a little bit. But it's about a 20 quid bottle of whiskey. It's a peated blend, and it is just absolutely beautiful. I love peated whiskies, so it's kind of up my street. But it's a really sweet style of peat, and it's quite a kind of sweet and soft. It's not a really intense kind of like blow your hair off kind of peat. It's a really nice, approachable style of peated whiskey. But that's a good example of some of the blends that we make. And we do a lot of different blending projects for different countries around the world. So there's a good chance that even though we won't have the best-selling whiskey in every market, like Johnny Walker or anything, a lot of our whiskies will be in the top 10 or top 5 best-selling whiskies, especially in mainland Europe.
I noticed when we were pre-pouring some of these that there was a wee bit of sediment in a couple of the bottles. And I assume that was from the port cask.
Yeah, it was. That's quite a funny story.
I couldn't quite remember what the story was, but there was something about the sediment blocking
there is. If you ever find a bottle of the 15-year-old Tawny Port in a shop, because it will have been sat on the shop shelf for a while, the sediment will have all collected at the bottom. But if you pick the bottle up and just flip it upside down, you will actually see there's going to be quite a few bits of sediment that have made their way into the bottle. So this has been filtered. It's not bits from the cask. And to be honest, I'm personally still not 100% sure on how this has happened. But when we were bottling this, there was quite a lot of sediment that ended up coming from the casks, where it actually blocked up all of the filters that we had at our bottling site, which was a huge issue for us because we don't just bottle for ourselves. We've got quite a big bottling plant, and we bottle for quite a lot of people in the industry. And suddenly we had ran this Tawny Port cask finish through our filters, and it clogged up the filters because there was that much sediment in them. So it shut down our bottling plant for like a couple of days. And once we got the filters cleaned and then kind of ran everything through again, it still was like blocking them up. So like it has all gone through the filters. We didn't just think, screw it, it's blocking up the filters, we'll just bottle it without filtering it. But I guess the sediment that has made its way through the filters has ended up kind of connecting back with its other mates, and it's just created more sediment again, I guess.
Well, it shows it shows it's a natural product, though, as well.
Well, exactly. To be honest, I think it adds to it. For me personally, I don't care if there's a little bit of sediment in it. I think it adds to it, and it makes it a bit more authentic. Because, like I said, and like we touched on earlier, all Tomintoul core range is 40%. It's chill filtered, got a little bit of colouring. Nothing else that we're trying tonight, including this one we're on, have been chill filtered. They've not had any colouring added. I mean, so this is the non-age statement version. Like I said, I don't have the 15-year-old with me, but colouring does not do that to whiskey.
No.
Colouring makes it go more.
That's sweet and sour.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
So that's natural colouring. So we have it. Yeah. So, like I said, I think it just adds to the authenticity of the dram.
Yeah.
And it'll probably.
And if anybody is interested in port, I'll just throw something in here. We are doing a port tasting with the wine club, which anybody can come to on the 6th of November. We're doing 8 ports, 4 from Sandemans, 4 from Ferrera, and we're doing of the 8 ports, we're doing 2 10-year-old Tonys, 2 20-year-old Tonys, and 2 30-year-old Tonys. And the 30-year-old Tony is hitting about 100 quid a bottle. So you've got a great experience sitting one evening tasting. I think the brand ambassador's coming up from London to talk about it, and that'll give you the experience of port and the history of port. So if you're free, if you want to come to the Dumfries and come to a port tasting, then you're more than welcome. Take a sickie, but
I don't get sickies. There's nobody to replace.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. This is being recorded. Of course not.
Yeah.
Right. Can we move on to this beauty of a quarter cask?
Yes, and you're spot on. It is an absolute beauty of it's a PX quarter cask finish. This one, and I'll be honest, normally PX casks aren't really my thing. I like the whiskey that a PX cask makes. I think it's very tasty, but I don't get experimental with my PX casks. I'm not too fussed about trying every distillery's PX cask, because I personally, for me, I think a lot of them can end up being a little bit repetitive, because PX has got such a big influence. And it is beautiful. Like I said, it makes a really sweet, easy drinking style of whiskey. And I do drink a lot of PX casks. But it's just not really my style overall, I guess. So when this one was released, it was released side by side with the last dram, with the 15-year-old Tawny Port. And like I said, Tawny Port cask finishes is my favourite style of a cask finish. So when these were both released, I had to take home some samples to try the whiskies side by side. And in my head, I had already thought, Tawny Port's my favourite cask finish. I just know I'm going to prefer that over this PX cask. And I couldn't have been any more wrong. I love that Tawny Port cask finish. It is beautiful. But this PX cask finish really just kind of shocked me, if anything. Because, like I said, I'm not huge on PX casks myself, whereas this really surprised me. It just surprised me because it started off quite bright and jammy and almost fresh for a PX sherry cask, which you really don't get that often. And to be honest, I'm very confused how it happened, because these are PX quarter casks. So you would expect with a PX quarter cask, it's going to be a really punchy and powerful and chewy and treacly style of a finish. And it does have a lot of those like heavy, dark, dried, fruity flavors towards the end of the dram. But as soon as this thing touches your lips or touches your tongue, it surprisingly just started off really, really bright, which kind of took me off guard. It caught me off guard a little bit, I guess. And I'm just such a huge fan of this whiskey. I think out of our newer releases, again, you shouldn't pick favourites, but out of our newer releases, I would definitely say that this has probably been my favourite, just because it's had that little bit of almost breathed a little bit of life into sherry PX casks for me. But 14-year-old, it's spent 12 years in bourbon casks, and then it's been 2 years in these quarter casks. And to be honest, 2 years for a quarter cask is a really long finish. And I know I was saying 2 years on your non-age statement ones is a longer finish, but in a quarter cask, 2 years really is quite a long finish. And you you are running the risk of almost overcooking a whiskey at that point if you're using quarter casks and maturing it for such a long period of time in such an active cask as well. But it's just turned out absolutely fantastic. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, casks, I always try to relate casks kind of like, I mean, I've obviously used the teabag analogy, but like I try to relate them kind of to cooking as well. So it's like you're cooking a steak or a bit of meat. If you're using a really, really active cask, like a PX quarter cask, if anything, that's kind of like you're frying a steak on the pan. And then if you're using maybe a fourth or fifth fill cask for a much longer period of time, that's like you're cooking something in the slow cooker for 8 hours while you're away at work. But then if you reverse them and you use a really powerful cask for too long a period of time, you are going to run the risk of kind of overcooking it. So it's kind of like you're cooking something on the pan for 8 hours while you're at work. You're going to be lucky if you come back to a house, never mind a bit of steak. And then again, if you swap it around the other way, if you use your kind of fourth or fifth fill casks, which are generally better for longer maturations, and you only use it for a couple of years, it's going to be like trying to cook a steak in the slow cooker over 3 minutes or so. You're going to have a tough morning. So, like I said, using these kind of PX quarter casks for 2 years is an impressively long amount of time that we've managed to get out of that. But again, Ian is watching all of these casks very, very closely. So it's all about just when the whiskey is ready, and that's when it gets bottled. Because I guess realistically, on paper, if you were finishing in a PX quarter cask, on paper, you probably wouldn't say that you're going to put it down for 2 years. But with Ian kind of constantly monitoring it and making sure it was going in a positive direction, it's came out as a beautiful finish that has definitely not been overcooked. Like I said, I was seriously impressed by how kind of like jammy and how much of that kind of like berry side of things you started getting coming through with this one. Which I guess is probably why I liked it so much, because as I was saying, I really like tawny port cask finishes because of how juicy and jammy it makes a whiskey. And then this one, it has just turned out to be a bit of like more of a rich style of jam, like a damson jam or something like that. But yeah, I was seriously impressed by this one, and it's a big favourite of mine. Hopefully you guys can tell from the mini rant I've just done on it. But yeah, so I think, like I said, this is one of the newest releases that we've done, and for me, out of our newer releases, so this and the 15-year-old Tawny Port, they both came out at the same time, and it's just a really good way of showcasing Tomintoul in that side, which is 46%, and it's not chill filtered, and it's natural colouring as well. What do you think, Brian?
Lovely jubbly.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
And it does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's such a stunning whiskey.
Yeah. And you think the tonic port was good, which it was, but you've got this, and just as you see, the quarter cask finish doesn't have to be too long in cask, but it's just yummy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a beautiful whiskey, and it's just turned out so well. And I guess with our Karen, yes, it's me typing this, really doesn't like PX, but does like this. See, that's another thing I've found as well. Other people that I've spoken to who are not too keen on PX, I'll get them to, like, I'll ask them why they don't like PX, and they'll say, I don't know, it's too intense or too treacly, too chewy. And I'll take them to this, and it's just a different side of PX. And usually, again, it ends up kind of winning people over.
As I've said in probably every whiskey tasting at the end, I mean, I love PX. It's probably my desert island wine, providing that there's a generator with a fridge that's I can chill the PX and my cans of Guinness. But I'd be happy. And PX over quality vanilla ice cream at the end of an evening.
Yeah.
Ultimate dessert. And it would normally suggest a sweet wine with it. But why not have this with your dessert with a quality vanilla ice cream with a scoop load of PX over the top, and just have this as its accompaniment at the end of a meal.
Yeah.
And a pint of Guinness, obviously.
And a pint of Guinness. You got it. I can't remember if it says on the label for this one.
Is it limited bottling?
Yes, so this one's a limited run. So it's one of 4,300 bottles. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, well, that's not too many, though, is it? Really?
Yeah. So again, because it's quarter casks, it really hasn't produced much liquid in the first place. But yeah, there's only 4,000 bottles in the run. So yeah, what kind of price is it going for, Brian?
Normally £95, and it's on offer at 83.
Amazing, it's brilliant.
So well, quite a bottle.
Yeah. Now, for the sake of time, I don't want to eat into everyone's night too much, so we will move on. But don't feel like you need to rush them away. It's always good to jump back to drams as well. But we are going to move on to the final dram, which is a complete change of pace from everything else that we've had so far. So, like I said, Angus Dundee Distillers, we are primarily a blending and bottling company, and the distilling side of things has only been a recent, fairly recent, past 25 years now. But when we bought Tomintoul Distillery, that was a huge step for the company because, like I said, it meant that we had a little bit of control over some spirit and we had something to kind of bargain with at that point. Then 3 years later, in 2003, when we bought Glencadam, that was another huge step for us because then we had two very different and two very distinct types of spirit that we could play with. So that was good for our blends, but it was also good for dealing with other companies because then we had blends that we had spirit that we could supply to other people of two very distinct natures. But one style of spirit that we still didn't have was a peated style of spirit. So, and it's really important as a blender to be able to make your own peated style of spirit because peated spirit is more expensive because there's less of it. You're generally fighting over the same 10, 15 distilleries to get peated spirit out of them. So it is a little bit more expensive. So as an experiment, we ran some peated spirit through Tomintoul stills for 1 week of a year. This must have been about 20 years ago now. And it worked out really well. So the next year, they doubled it. And they did 2 weeks of the year. 1 week for bottling, 1 week for blending. The next year, they doubled it again. And now we're up to the point where we're at 6 weeks of the year where we're making peated spirit. We can't, and that peated spirit is Old Ballantrae. So the reason it's called Ballantrae is because that's the water source for Tomintoul Distillery. It's the Ballantrae Spring. Now, we would love to make more of this, but we can't go past that 6 week mark. Tomintoul Distillery is at absolute capacity. We can't make any more. We've got 4 stills at Tomintoul, and we don't have any imminent plans that I'm aware of anyway. Again, they don't tell me anything. But we don't have any imminent plans to put any more production in place at Tomintoul. So the more Old Ballantrae we make, it would mean we would be making less Tomintoul. And we can't afford to make any less Tomintoul. So I guess we're in quite a good position compared to the rest, a few other distilleries in the industry at the moment. Obviously, as we touched on earlier, with some distilleries closing down and like lowering their production. So we're in quite a good position where we can't afford to make any less than we are making right now. And if we could, we would be making a lot more. So we would love to make some more Ballantrae. We would love to be making more Tomintoul. And we would absolutely love to be making more Glencadam. But both distilleries are at absolute capacity. And as it stands right now, we simply can't make any more. On that note as well, we're also in the middle of building a distillery in China. So again, we're not a gigantic company, but we're doing a lot of investment right now in terms of building a distillery in China, and we're building the visitor centre at Glencadam. So I guess it's us not wanting to take on too many projects at the same time. So perhaps somewhere down the line, we will increase production at Tomintoul or even Glencadam if we can figure out a way to squeeze some more stills in there. But at the moment, we can't make any more, and there's no direct plans to make any more. But Old Ballantrae, this one that we're on is 55 ppm, so 55 phenolic parts per million, which is up with the likes of Lafroig and Ardbeg. It's, in terms of ppm levels, it's really up there with your bigger Islay guys. But the style of peat that we're using here is it's mainland peat, so it's a lot more meaty, a little bit sweeter, and a little bit more kind of herbal and floral at the same time as well, as opposed to your Islays, which are up at your 50, 60 ppm mark, but they are more medicinal and coastal and a little bit funky in a sense, I guess. So I think Ballantrae is a really nice kind of differing peated expression that just shows something a little bit fresher and newer, since most of your peated spirit does come from Islay. They're all using Islay peat, so it tends to be definitely not samey, because there's a lot of amazing Islay distilleries out there. I absolutely love my peated whiskey. I'm actually pretty certain a big reason why I ended up even getting this job is because in my interview I went on like a 15-minute rant on why I love Old Ballantrae. And I love it because it is just, again, similar to that 14-year-old PX Tomintoul. It's a little bit of a breath of fresh air into that peated world, as much as that 14-year-old PX for me was a breath of fresh air into a PX cask. It's not my living room. I don't think my fiance. So Williams just asked if this is my living room. And my fiance would not be happy if this was my living room. It's more of a side room that I use, that I've kind of turned into an office/bar. But glad to hear you're impressed. I'm also pretty impressed. There's also a couple levels that you can't see here as well. So I've got a nice wee selection. Keeps me entertained. But yeah, Old Ballantrae. This is fully matured in bourbon casks, 50% ABV, non-chill filtered, and it's 55 phenolic parts per million. Now, this is the non-age statement version of it. We do also have a 10-year-old version of this, and we have a 15-year-old version of this. Now, interestingly, the 15-year-old, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but as far as I'm aware, it is. The 15-year-old is the last peated whiskey we made that actually uses Speyside peat. So the Fumesac bog, which is just out, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation there, but that's the bog that's just out the back of Tomintoul, and it was the more commonly used Speyside peat bog. That was closed about 15 or 20 years ago now. So the 15-year-old Old Ballantrae is one of, if not the last peated whiskies that still uses that Speyside peat from 15, 20 years ago. Whereas the Old Ballantrae 10 and the Old Ballantrae non-age statement, which we're on tonight, they're now using just mainland peat. So at the moment, I think this will be coming from the Black Isle, but it kind of depends which supplier you're going through for your malt, because we'll change between kind of Crisp, Simpsons, Muntons, and Bairds. They're kind of your four main guys. But yeah, it's mainland peat, so it is definitely a lot more meaty, softer. You're going to get way more of that kind of like barbecue sauce style coming through with this whiskey, as opposed to if you went to your Islays. Like I said, it's more of that medicinal and coastal element that you get coming through with them. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this one. Like I said, it's a very different expression from Tomintoul, because we don't really normally do peated spirit at all. But we just brought this out as, well, it started as an experiment, and it turned out really tasty, so we bottled it at the same time. And at the moment, like I said, everything for Ballantrae is fully matured in bourbon casks. I have absolutely no idea if there are any plans to bring out Ballantrae in a different cask type, but I would love it if we did. One of my favourite styles of peat is peat and sherry, I know I just kind of went on a little bit of a sherry bashing spree a little bit earlier, but peat and sherry, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's beautiful. Kilchoman Loch Gorm is one of my favourite drams because of that kind of peat and sherry side to things.
Yep. I was just about to come on and say that's a cracking dram, and I'm not a peat fan, but what I do like is mainland peat.
Yeah.
What I do like is peated whiskey with sherry, PX, or it's a balance between the two. You've got the peatiness and you've got the sweetness of them. It'd be interesting that. That could be your next.
I would love it if we.
Aye.
Yeah, I would love it if we brought something up from Ballantrae in a sherry cask or a port.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
Aye. Just to get that balance right, because it's not heavily peated, as you say. It's not got the iodine TCP.
Yeah, exactly. I always at a lot of festivals I do, I get so many people that tell me, similar to what I was saying with the wine casks, I get a lot of people that tell me they don't like peated whiskey. After they've had a couple drams at my table, I'll try and convince them that Ballantrae is not your typical peated whiskey, because a lot of people who say they don't like peated whiskies, they've maybe only really had a Lafroig or a Port Charlotte or something
and
like that.
And that would put them off completely.
And to someone who doesn't like that kind of flavour, that really would put you off.
Yep.
But I think smoky whiskies is just like any other whiskey, right? There's so much flavour in smoky whiskies, and there's different flavours of smoke. So just because you didn't like one smoky whiskey doesn't mean you don't like them all.
Yep.
It's like me with PX. Just because I don't like some of them doesn't mean that there's going to be none out there that I don't like. Or if someone doesn't like a bourbon cask, doesn't mean that you won't like any bourbon casks. But it's the same. I suppose it's the same with wine. If your first experience, say you're 18 or 19, and somebody gives you a glass of wine and it's a Sauternes, and that's your first glass of white wine, and you go, that's white wine. I'm never going to drink white wine again. And it's the same with whiskey. If your first whiskey you've ever had, somebody gives you a Lafroig or a Bowmore or an Ardbeg, you're going, if that's what whiskey tastes like, I'm never going to drink whiskey again. Yeah, exactly.
No disrespect to the distilleries that have been previously mentioned. But it's just, you're at the extreme level of a taste sensation, basically. So you start at the bottom, work up.
Yeah.
With hindsight, crystal ball, that's what you should do. But that was a great tasting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've went through the whole range of different varieties and cask finishes and styles. So that's absolutely great. And the fact that you're coming to the festival as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'll see you guys there.
And you're bringing whiskies that we've not tried tonight.
Yeah, we're going to have a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, so I think you're bringing the 18-year-old.
Yeah,
I think you're bringing the 18-year-old Glencadam as well. I'm not too sure. I'll double check on that. But thank you for your time. It's Friday night. 2 Friday nights, actually. It's great. It's a bit of a commitment to do 2 Friday nights.
That's all good. I don't get weekends with this job, so.
But to do it for the same company, rather than 2 different places, you're doing it for us.
Yeah.
It's a great commitment. I fully appreciated of it. And I'm sure anybody watching this and who came last week will be coming to your stand and asking to try various whiskies that we've not tried before. And if you've got, also we showed you the Glencadam.
The wee keyring, there you go.
Spoiled.
And you've got the
There's a wee keyring there. We have some of them available. If you buy a bottle of Tomintoul, whatever you want to say, tomato, potato.
I should get some cans of Guinness on my stand at Dram Busters as well. And
here's
a wee tinny for you as well.
I'd be your helper for the whole afternoon, so that wouldn't be good. Have to drive the van home. But anyway, thank you very much, Cameron, for your time. It's been great. If you want, we're going to do a wee raffle afterwards. But if you want to just stay there in the background for 5 minutes, we'll have a wee catch up afterwards. If that's
sounds good.
okay.
I'll hang around.
And
All
we'll
good.
do it. Great. I just didn't disappear. Didn't go to that karaoke bar. Yeah, you've been barred. You've been barred. Anyway, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Excellent whiskies. Good information. Great questions. Thank you very much for everybody that's done the questions. That's great. Interacting helps me, helps the guest speaker, and it asks questions that maybe other people are thinking about but I'm not doing. So here we go. We're going to do the raffle. We have 4 prizes. Mrs. Gibson's going to do a wee shugle with the. Go on then. Get in there. Get in there. Get in there. Oh, there's 2. There's 2. Okay, give them a shugle again. So, first one out the hat is 3, 2, 4. Well done. Next one. 4, 4, 9. There's 2 more, by the way. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. 3, 4, 1. And the last one, I'll pick it. 3, 9, 1. That's it. That's the 4 raffle prizes. Thank you very much. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. You'll notice if you're in Dumfries that we are getting major works done with the scaffolding. That's to do with the regeneration of the town centre, and it's all about getting the building back to what it was. Historic Scotland are involved. They're agreed to building. It's going to be great. It's an inconvenience, and it's a major inconvenience at the moment. Half the people in the precinct are closed. We're not. The scaffolding's up. It says quite clearly we're open. If you're in the town and see the scaffolding, we're not closed. Come in. Please come in. See us. It's going to be great when the scaffolding's down and everything's sorted. If we had an absolute fantastic building for the town centre, going back to what it was years ago. We are doing a rum tasting on the 24th of October. There's no rum club. Just go into the website. We're doing 8 rums from about £29 a bottle to £89 a bottle. And there is a chance of winning a 1.75 litre of EXO rum at about 107 quid a bottle. And also, some of the rums, most of the rums are 20 quid a bottle on the night. So that's a rum tasting that we're going to be about. And we mentioned previously about the port tasting. We have a wine club. It's free to join. All the wine club members know about it. But if you want to join the wine club or want any information about the port tasting, just sign up online. You'll get the emails. We've got a wine tasting coming up next Thursday at the Cairndale called Call My Bluff, and 3 people will be standing up talking about the wines. One's lying, 2's lying, one's telling the truth. Who's telling the truth about each wine? Or are they? And that's where 4-course meal. So, on behalf of Carl and I and the team of TB Watson's and obviously Cameron, thank you for your time on a Friday evening. We hope to see your orders coming through, and we hope to see you all at the Whisky Festival. So, if there is a few tickets left, if you haven't bought your Whisky Festival tickets, buy them now. They're online. So, have a great weekend, folks. Hopefully, it's going to be dry. Enjoy yourselves and drink responsibly.